Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are swapping out some of the technical complexity we often cover for something just as powerful.
I mean, even more fundamental.
Exactly. Language.
Mm.
We are diving into a stack of sources that explore words as these really precise instruments for describing kinetic energy and motion. The very mechanisms that drive emotions, progress, and change in our lives.
And it's such an essential reframing, isn't it?
It is.
Because we often reserve this idea of energy for, physics class or for batteries.
Right.
But the most powerful movements in the world, I mean, whether they're social or psychological, they require an accurate vocabulary.
So what's our mission today?
Our mission is to cut through all the noise and really extract the nuanced meaning of three kinetic terms. We're looking for the exact language to capture overflowing joy, a relentless, unstoppable force, and that specific little spark that sets a massive change in motion.
And when you get that kind of precise language, you're not just being eloquent. It feels like you have a shortcut to being well-informed.
That's it.
Because you can articulate the mechanism of power, not just the result.
Absolutely. So we're focusing on three magnificent words that will structure this deep dive: ebullient, inexorable, and catalyst.
Okay.
And by dissecting what these words truly describe about movement and force, you gain this new lens to view everything from, say, your personal drive to global trends.
So where do we start?
Let's start at the beginning of that spectrum, with the most immediate, personalized form of energy, emotional overflow.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our first word is ebullient. That's spelled E-B-U-L-L-I-E-N-T.
Ebullient.
It's an adjective, and the core definition is something like cheerful and full of energy. Exuberant.
It feels good just to say it.
It does.
Yes.
But,
yeah.
I mean, why is this word so special? Why not just say happy?
And that's the key distinction our sources really dig into. What's fascinating here is the etymology, because it gives us this physics-based metaphor.
Okay.
The word comes directly from the Latin word ebullire,
Ebulli.
which means to boil over. So it immediately grounds the word in kinetic energy.
So it's not just a state of being. It's an action.
Exactly. The visualization is, well, it's everything here. We're not talking about some quiet, warm sense of contentment.
No.
We're talking about a pot of water on the stove that's bubbling, the energy is building, and then it literally reaches capacity and spills over the edge.
Right.
That physical, energetic spill is the kind of force captured by the word ebullient.
That spill mechanism you mentioned seems crucial. This is more than just being, say, enthusiastic.
Much more.
The sources stress that when someone is ebullient, their good mood doesn't just stay trapped inside them. It's a highly transmissible emotional state. It spills over onto everyone else in the room, creating this shared infectious energy.
And that's the distinction. If you say someone is joyful, you're describing their internal state.
Right.
But if you say they are ebullient, you're describing the kinetic transfer of that state to other people. That's why it's so powerful in describing these peak collective moments.
Like a celebration.
Exactly. It's the energy of a massive celebration where the joy in one corner just moves across the room, or the atmosphere around a hard-won victory. That feeling that just can't be contained.
But hold on, if it means boiling over, does it always have to be positive? Could you, for instance, describe an ebullient frustration or an ebullient rage that spills out?
That's a really thoughtful challenge. And technically, you're right. The root ebullire can apply to any boiling.
Okay.
But the modern use of the word, and certainly how our sources frame it, has strongly cemented it in the realm of overflowing positive emotion. To apply it to rage would feel a little poetic, maybe archaic.
So context is key.
It is. When we talk about these kinetic words, we rely on established context. And ebullient is that overwhelming, delightful energy that cannot be contained.
It clicks. It gives us a much better, more visual way to describe those peak moments. Instead of just saying she was really, really happy about her news, we can focus on that transfer mechanism.
Precisely. And the source provides this perfect illustration. It says, she was in an ebullient mood after hearing the news that her first book was going to be published.
Yeah.
That phrase just perfectly captures the overwhelming spilling over nature of that joy. It tells us not just what she felt, but how that feeling moved from her out into her environment. Its internalized energy turned outward.
Okay, so that covers the internal overflowing energy,
Yeah.
the bubbly, contagious force that starts from within. But what about movement, that is? External, relentless, and completely unstoppable by anything we do.
Right. Now we transition from the overflowing individual to the unstoppable force of history or nature or time itself.
We need a word for emotion that guarantees its outcome.
We do.
And next up is a very powerful word for things that just cannot be halted. Inexorable.
Inexorable.
Spelled Inexorable.
Oh.
The definition is an adjective describing something that's impossible to stop or prevent. It's unavoidable, mandatory motion.
And this is a word that describes a kind of mechanical inevitability, not just simple persistence.
What do you mean?
The sources frequently apply this to forces far larger than any human effort. We often use it, for instance, to describe the steady, relentless passing of time. You can't stop it. You can only try to live within it.
So if we connect this back to kinetic energy, inexorable describes a momentum so great that any resistance is...
Well, it's mathematically negligible. It's like applying a metaphorical FMA to social change.
That's a great way to put it.
An inexorable force doesn't care about obstacles. It just keeps moving forward, basically flattening whatever is in its path.
It's movement with a guaranteed endpoint. Contrast this with a word like persistent. Persistence is about continued effort despite obstacles.
Right.
Inexorable is about the certainty of the result, regardless of the effort you apply against it.
But wait a minute. Can anything truly be inexorable in human affairs? I mean, doesn't our ability to intervene or resist or change course mean that calling something inexorable is just hubris?
That's a really important question, and the sources handle it by framing inexorability as a matter of scale.
Yeah. When applied to human systems, it describes trends that have built up such massive societal inertia like, say, the shift towards digital communication or globalization.
I see.
The short-term resistance of individuals or small groups only serves as minor friction, not a true stop. The argument is that once a societal force reaches a certain critical mass, its trajectory becomes essentially unchangeable within a human lifetime.
So, like the move from CDs to streaming.
Exactly. Think of the inexorable march of technological replacement. Vinyl gives way to CDs, which give way to streaming. You can still buy a vinyl player, but you can't halt the underlying economic force.
So the momentum is just too big to be defeated by the resources we have now.
Precisely. And this is where the tone of a word gets really interesting, because that feeling can shift dramatically.
How so?
Well, if we talk about the inexorable rise of the tide, as one source suggests, it feels powerful, even intimidating. It implies a force that will certainly overwhelm you if you don't adjust.
But you mentioned that we can flip that feeling, that it can describe a really positive human trait, too.
Yes, exactly. The duality is critical. You can describe a person's intense determination in pursuit of a long-term goal as inexorable.
I like that.
If they are inexorable, it means their focus is so unwavering that they will never give up, and their ultimate success feels almost predestined.
So in this case, the unstoppable momentum is internal.
It is, but the force itself is directed outward and is totally unyielding to any outside resistance. It's pure grit described as a kinetic, physical quality.
That makes the distinction between determined and inexorable much clearer. Determined is having the will. Inexorable is possessing that guaranteed arrival because the sheer volume of effort just can't be stopped.
And look at how it works in a dynamic setting. The sports anecdote in our source material is perfect.
What's that?
It says, despite the team's best efforts to defend, the inexorable advance of the opposing players led to a final goal in the last minute.
So it wasn't just that they were playing well.
No. The source shows us their collective advance had such a powerful, heavy momentum that it literally prevented effective resistance. It became an inevitability.
So we've covered the overwhelming internal overflow of ebullient and the relentless, unstoppable external force of inexorable.
Whoa.
We've seen the two ends of the spectrum of continuous motion.
We have.
Now we need the word that describes that single moment when the kinetic energy is first unleashed. We need the spark that starts the whole process.
And that brings us to our final and maybe most strategically useful word, catalyst.
Catalyst. C-A-T-A-L-Y-S-T. This is a noun, and it has a dual definition. In science, it's a substance that increases the rate of a chemical reaction without being consumed or changed by the reaction itself.
And in daily life, it's a person or a thing that precipitates or sets off an event or a major change. This is the key. The catalyst is the match that starts the fire.
Right.
It's not the fuel, it's not the fire itself, but it's that tiny trigger that unleashes all the stored energy.
And that's really where the nuance is, right? The surrounding elements are ready, the fuel, the wood, the oxygen. They might all be present and just waiting.
But nothing happens.
Nothing happens until the catalyst arrives. That little spark is all that's needed to unleash a massive, potentially inexorable reaction.
And this is the distinction between a catalyst and, say, a standard trigger. A trigger might just start an action, but a catalyst fundamentally changes the rate and the trajectory of the reaction.
And it doesn't change itself.
Right, it remains unchanged. Think of a conversation. You might trigger an argument, but a conversation that acts as a catalyst for you to quit your job, that fundamentally speeds up a transition that was already possible, while the conversation itself just fades into memory.
What's so remarkable about the catalyst is that its power is entirely disproportionate to its size.
Totally.
The catalyst itself might be tiny, a single meeting, one comment, a minor piece of code, but the change it creates is huge. So the question is, how do we spot these high-leverage moments?
Well, the sources offer some really compelling examples, particularly in how a single legislative act or policy change can act as a catalyst for massive economic shifts.
Can you give us an example that really shows this massive kinetic effect from a tiny input?
Yeah, think about the rise of the modern semiconductor industry. Decades ago, the infrastructure, the research, the underlying potential for microchips, it was all there.
But it wasn't scaling.
It wasn't scaling fast enough. So what was the catalyst? It wasn't a scientific breakthrough. It was a policy decision. Specifically, the U.S. Department of Defense decided that they needed a guaranteed domestic supply of reliable, small semiconductors for their guidance systems.
So a procurement need, that was the spark.
That was the spark. The DoD, by guaranteeing initial orders and setting these incredibly rigorous quality standards, essentially became the initial external catalyst.
Wow.
They didn't invent the technology and they didn't consume the industry. They just sped up the rate of maturation exponentially. That guaranteed initial market was the single point that broke the inertia.
And the resulting advance was?
Inexorable. The inexorable advance of microchip technology changed the global economy forever. The power of the catalyst wasn't in its size, but in its ability to unlock massive latent energy.
That example perfectly illustrates why we need this precision.
Yeah.
We can't just say the microchip industry grew because of demand.
Pretty simple.
We now have the language to describe the mechanical role of that initial demand. It was the catalyst. It's the strategic advantage of knowing where to put your limited energy for maximum kinetic returns.
We also see this in everyday life when one small event suddenly breaks our personal inertia. You might have been planning to start a new company for 5 years. That idea was a fuel. But nothing happens until you have that one specific defining conversation with a mentor, and they say one thing that clarifies your path, and suddenly you resign the next day.
That one conversation was the catalyst.
For a massive, complex life restructuring, yes.
It really provides the key insight that the most powerful forces for change are often not the forces that persist, but the tiny things that initiate.
That's the utility of these words. They aren't just synonyms for change or happiness. They describe the actual underlying mechanisms of motion, the transfer, the inevitability, and the initiation.
So let's quickly summarize the spectrum of kinetic energy we've mapped out today. We started with ebullient.
Internal emotional energy that overheats and overflows. It becomes infectious.
Then we moved to inexorable.
The external, unstoppable force. Motion with such massive momentum that the outcome is guaranteed, regardless of resistance.
And finally, catalyst.
The necessary spark. The small, unchanged trigger that precipitates a huge event and fundamentally speeds up the rate of change.
These words are really tools for thinking then.
They are. They're shortcuts not just to being eloquent, but to understanding the underlying mechanisms of power and movement, whether you are describing a psychological shift, a physical law, or a massive social trend.
So when you can identify if a force is ebullient or inexorable, or just a catalyst.
You are truly well informed.
And as you absorb this new high-leverage vocabulary, here is a final provocative thought to consider, one that connects all three concepts using your new kinetic language.
Okay.
If ebullience describes overwhelming internal energy, and a catalyst is the specific trigger for change, can a person's sustained ebullient mood act as the catalyst for an inexorable positive change in their own life?
That's a fascinating question. If you maintain that overflowing energy long enough, does it become the trigger for a self-sustaining, unstoppable momentum? That's definitely something to mull over as you encounter the inexorable march of your day.
Until next time, keep jiving deep.